August 5th, 1993. A rescue helicopter moves slowly over the jagged slopes of the Khamar Daban mountain range in southern Siberia. The pilots are searching for a group of experienced hikers, students and graduates, trained and prepared, who missed their scheduled check-in days earlier. From the air, something colorful appears against the grey storm. At first, it looks like discarded gear. As the helicopter descends, the reality comes into focus. It's not gear, it's a graveyard. The bodies are scattered across the slope, separated by distance and terrain, lying where they fell. It's summer. The temperatures in this region at this time of the year are considered survivable for equipped hikers. And yet, the scene makes no sense. Some of the hikers are partially naked, others are barefoot. There are no signs of an avalanche, no signs of a predator attack, no evidence of a sudden singular external force. What investigators document next deepens the confusion. The autopsy reports describe findings that do not fully align with uncomplicated exposure to cold. Bleeding from the eyes, froth at the mouth, severe bruising consistent with extreme internal physiological stress. These are not the details of a quiet freezing death. For decades, explanations rushed in to fill the gap. Soviet nerve agents, infrasound, secret weapons testing, even something supernatural. But these explanations share the same flaw. They look for an external threat. What if the danger wasn't outside at all? What if this wasn't a mystery of what attacked them, but a record of how the human body and mind unravel when multiple systems fail at once? This is not a ghost story. This is not a conspiracy. This is a forensic reconstruction of how a group of capable people entered a chain reaction they could not stop. This is the anatomy of the Khamar Daban disaster. The morning of August 5th brought no relief. Overnight, the rain had turned to wet snow. Wind continued to strip heat from the exposed ridge. When the group broke camp, they did so slowly, hands stiff, clothing saturated, bodies already struggling to recover warmth. Their ability to generate heat was becoming increasingly compromised. In cold environments, movement is not optional. It's a heat source. The body converts effort into warmth and warmth into survival. But that process depends on available energy. Calories must be present, muscles must function, coordination must hold. This is where the first system failure occurred. Alexander, known to the group as Sacha, was the largest and physically strongest member of the expedition. Under normal conditions, that would be an advantage. But in cold, calorie-depleted environments, larger bodies can become vulnerable more quickly. They require more energy to sustain temperature, and once that balance tips, recovery becomes difficult. According to the account of the sole survivor, Sacha began to slow. At first it was subtle. Then he stumbled. Then he fell behind. Moments later, he began to shout. When the others turned, what they saw shattered the illusion of control. Blood was visible at his nose and ears. Foam gathered at his mouth. He collapsed to his knees, disoriented and unresponsive. These observations were not interpreted at the time. They were simply witnessed. Korovina reached him first. Faced with a rapidly deteriorating situation, she made a decision consistent with survival training. She ordered the others to continue downhill toward the tree line while she stayed behind with Sacha. This was a rational instruction, but the group refused to leave. They were not thinking as individuals anymore. They were thinking as a unit under stress. They stayed on the exposed ridge to help. And in doing so, they made the situation far worse. By stopping, they stopped generating heat. Muscles cooled, circulation slowed, wet clothing prevented recovery. What had been a dangerous situation became critical. Sasha died in Korovina's arms within minutes. The sudden loss of the strongest member of the group, violent, unexpected, and incomprehensible, became a psychological trigger. Not because the group was weak, but because the system was already failing. Psychologists describe moments like this as a loss of cognitive hierarchy. Under extreme stress, the brain's threat response systems can override higher reasoning. Decision-making narrows. Fear becomes dominant, not as emotion, but as physiology. In cold conditions, this effect is magnified. Judgment degrades, coordination collapses. Panic doesn't look like screaming, it looks like disorganization. What happened next was not chaos, it was a cascade. It was the collapse of coordinated human behavior. According to the account of the sole survivor, Valentina Utochenko, the group began to come apart rapidly, each person responding differently as their bodies and minds failed under the same conditions. Tatiana was the first to lose control. She screamed and tore at the tent fabric, not with purpose, but with frantic, uncoordinated movement. She stumbled across sharp rock, showing no response to injury. Her breathing became labored. She clutched at her throat, a common distress response when the body can no longer regulate oxygen exchange effectively. She collapsed against a rock, striking her head repeatedly as her balance and motor control failed. Within moments, she stopped moving. This was not intention. It was neurological breakdown. Nearby, Victoria and Timur began to run, not toward shelter, not downhill, but in disorganized loops as if direction itself had lost meaning. As they moved, they began removing their clothing, jackets, gloves, hats, discarding insulation in freezing wind. This behavior is documented in severe cold exposure and is commonly referred to as paradoxical undressing. In advanced hypothermic states, the body's ability to regulate blood flow can become erratic. Blood vessels that normally constrict to preserve core heat may fail intermittently, allowing warm blood to surge toward the skin. The sensation is not cold, it is heat. Victims report feeling as though they are overheating, even as their core temperature continues to drop. In this state, removing clothing feels logical, even necessary. It is not a conscious decision, it's a sensory failure. One by one, the group collapsed. Denise attempted to shelter behind a rock, instinctively seeking protection from the wind. Korovina, the experienced leader, the anchor of the group, lost consciousness near Sacha, her system overwhelmed by the same conditions she had trained to resist. The sequence unfolded rapidly. Not hours, not days, but minutes. Valentina was left standing alone on the ridge, watching people she knew disintegrate into uncoordinated movement, labored breathing, and collapse. She checked for pulses. She called their names. There were none. She understood that she was now the only functioning system left, and yet something still didn't fit. Cold exposure is known to dull consciousness. It slows the body. It induces fatigue and confusion. It often leads to sleep-like collapse. But it doesn't typically explain everything witnessed on that slope. The bleeding, the froth, the violent loss of control. So the question remains, not whether cold was present, but whether cold alone is sufficient to explain the full cascade of failures that occurred that day. Valentina Utochenko stood alone on the ridge. She was 17 years old. Around her lay the bodies of her friends and of the woman who had led them there. The wind had not changed. The snow had not stopped. The environment was exactly the same. And yet one system was still functioning. Why did Valentina survive when the others didn't? The answer doesn't appear to be strength, endurance, or experience. It appears to lie in the timing and in a single divergence from the cascade that consumed the rest of the group. While others were exerting themselves, running, screaming, tearing at their clothing, Valentina did something counterintuitive. She stopped. By remaining still, she reduced her energy expenditure at the worst possible moment. Her breathing slowed. Her oxygen demand stayed lower. She didn't aid panic-driven exertion to an already failing system. This didn't make her safe. It only kept her from crossing the same threshold. Standing still for too long in these conditions would still mean death. Eventually, movement would be required. But when Valentina moved, she did so deliberately, not reactively. She gathered what she could from the wreckage: a sleeping bag, a flashlight. She checked each body one final time. There were no signs of life. The cold had already claimed them. Then she turned away. Alone, she began the descent toward the tree line. Over the next 3 days, Valentina moved through terrain that offered no shelter and no certainty. She followed the river downstream, navigating exhaustion and hunger. Later, she describes moments of confusion and distorted perception, common in prolonged exposure and sleep deprivation. At one point, she saw power lines and followed them, believing they might lead to safety. They didn't. They ended abruptly. An abandoned remnant of Soviet infrastructure, offering false hope and no protection. Eventually, she reached the Snezhnaya River. There, she was seen by a group of kayakers. They later described a teenage girl standing motionless on the riverbank, silent, staring at them with hollow eyes. When they approached, she didn't speak. She simply raised her arm and pointed back toward the mountain. The system had failed. She had escaped it, but only barely. When the bodies were finally recovered by helicopter nearly a month later, the official findings raised more questions than they answered. The recorded cause of death was listed simply as hypothermia. To many observers, that conclusion felt incomplete. Accounts from the recovery describe details that seem difficult to reconcile with a quiet death from cold alone. Bleeding from the nose and eyes, froth visible at the mouth, violent loss of coordination prior to collapse. These details became the foundation of speculation. online investigators and conspiracy theorists argued that something more exotic must have been involved. They pointed to rumors that the Khamar Daban range had once hosted Soviet military activity. They proposed invisible toxins, secret weapons, or airborne agents that could explain sudden neurological collapse. But these interpretations share a common flaw. They assume that hypothermia is a simple process. Modern wilderness medicine suggests otherwise. Extreme cold, sustained exertion, altitude, dehydration, and exhaustion do not act independently. They interact. And when they do, the body can enter failure states that produce symptoms unfamiliar to those who expect hypothermia to look peaceful. One example is a condition known in high-altitude medicine as high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. HAPE or HAPE is not a poison. It's not an infection. It's a stress response that can occur when the lungs are exposed to low oxygen levels combined with exertion and cold. Under these conditions, blood vessels in the lungs can constrict unevenly. Pressure increases. Fluid may leak into the air spaces of the lungs. When that happens, breathing becomes difficult. Oxygen exchange deteriorates, and a frothy, sometimes pink tingled fluid can appear at the mouth. This mechanism doesn't require extreme altitude alone. It has been documented in environments where cold, exertion, and physiological stress converge. Importantly, this is not a diagnosis. No single condition explains everything that occurred on that slope. But modern medicines do show that overlapping stress responses, pulmonary strain, neurological impairment, and thermoregulatory failure can coexist and amplify one another. As oxygen levels drops, judgment degrades. As coordination fails, injuries occur. As circulation becomes erratic, bleeding can appear in unexpected places. None of these requires a toxin. None of it requires intent, and none of it happens in isolation. The forensic record doesn't point to a single cause. It points to a cascade. A system under sustained stress crossed multiple thresholds at once, and once crossed, recovery was no longer possible. Hypothermia was not the event. It was the final state. In documented cases of extreme physiological stress, fluid can enter the airways when the lungs are no longer able to regulate pressure and oxygen exchange effectively. When air passes through that fluid, it can create a frothy appearance. If there is injury to the mouth, through involuntary clenching, impact, or collapse, that foam may become tinged with blood. To an untrained observer, it can resemble vomiting blood. Without context, it can appear far more mysterious than it is. And the bleeding from the eyes? The conjunctiva, the thin membrane covering the surface of the eye, is densely supplied with blood vessels. Under sudden circulatory strain, exposure of freezing wind, and intense physical stress, these tiny vessels can rupture. The result is visually shocking. It looks unnatural. It looks deliberate. But it is not. It is a mechanical failure of the body's smallest systems under extreme conditions, not evidence of a chemical attack or an external agent. The tragedy of the Khamar Daban incident is not that these hikers were killed by a secret weapon, a monster, or an unknown force. It is that they were undone by a series of small, interacting biological failures. A storm that soaked their clothing, a decision that left them exposed, a moment of panic that accelerated systems already under strain. The human body is a remarkable machine. It can endure cold, hunger, and injury far beyond what most imagine. But it's not infinite. When multiple safeguards fail at once, resilience becomes vulnerability. On August 5, 1993, the hikers of Khamar Daban didn't encounter something unnatural. They encountered the limits of their own physiology. And in the end, the most haunting image is not the moment of collapse on the ridge. It is the sight of a 17-year-old girl emerging from the forest alone, carrying a silence that would follow her for years.